evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to our Mind and Life Europe Association members and our Mind and Life Europe friends. We're going to start on time because we promise we'll also end on time. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our third webinar. My name is Cornelius Pietzner, and I am the Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe. We launched our Mind and Life Europe Friends a couple of weeks ago and are very pleased that you have chosen to become a friend of Mind and Life Europe and partake in this and also hopefully future webinars and offerings that we're preparing for you. In the next weeks and months, we have a number of interesting webinars and also webcasts that are planned exclusively for our Mind and Life friends. And with this, our third webinar, we will have featured 3 scientists, all of whom are engaged in groundbreaking and innovative work. And the subsequent webinars will feature contemplatives who are closely connected with Mind and Life Europe. So again, we're delighted that you have joined us for this evening's webinar. In regard to the format, our featured speaker will present for 30 minutes. And after that, we will proceed to your questions and responses, and we'll conclude the seminar, the webinar at 19:30 in 1 hour. As a practical matter, it would be very nice if during the presentation you would mute your speaker function so we don't hear background noises. And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat. Use the chat function often and wisely. Those questions then we can ask Professor Singer at the end of her presentation. We'll also be listing an email where you can ask questions that where we might not have time to answer them, and we can get back to you, or even for general questions, including about the Mind and Life Europe Friends program. Details of which, by the way, you can find on our website, also in regard to upcoming events. So, the topic of this evening's webinar is the power of compassion from the Resource Project. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Tania Singer, Honorary Board Member of Mind and Life Europe, as our presenter. Tania Singer is the scientific head of the Social Neuroscience Lab of the Max Planck Society in Berlin, Germany. She completed her PhD in psychology at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin. And in 2006, she first became assistant professor and later inaugural chair of social neuroscience and neuroeconomics, as well as co-director of the Laboratory for Social and Neural Systems Research at the University of Zurich. Between 2010 and 2018, Tania Singer was the director of the Department of Neurosciences at the Max Planck Institute of Cognitive and Human Development in Leipzig, Germany. Her research focuses on the hormonal, neuronal, and developmental basis of human sociality, empathy, and compassion, and their malleability through mental training. Tania is the author of more than 150 scientific articles and book chapters, and edited, together with Mathieu Ricard, also an honorary board member of Mind and Life Europe, the 2 Mind and Life Europe books, Caring Economics and Power and Care in 2019. So with that, a very warm welcome to Tania Singer. We're most pleased to have you with us for this webinar. Over to you, Tania.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you. Thank you. So I will just share the screen now, just to make sure you can see my presentation. Oops. Oop. Oh. Can you see it well? Yes? Okay. So I will start now and give you a kind of an input, and I'm very, very much looking forward, of course, to your question and to the discussion. That's always most fun, and that's witches. So I was asked to talk, about the power of compassion in the context of this huge 1-year longitudinal study we did. It's a kind of more or less lifelong project because it's multi-method and has more than 300 people undergoing 9 months training and 90 different measures. So what I want to do first is, what did we actually train the social brain? what is cognitive perspective taking, and how is empathy different from compassion. And after this backbone, I can show you that actually one big message of the resource project is that we shouldn't talk about mindfulness or meditation anymore as one kind of thing, because there are so many different practices, and depending on which practice, you will show and have very different effects. And I will show some of these effects on the brain, and some on social connectedness, on social stress, and on cooperation. So let me start. The resource project really was born, in 2008 already. We had already then a lot of global problems to solve. I think the last years saw a huge acceleration of these global problems. I mean, we are in the middle of one big pandemic, which is worldwide and global, but we still have not solved the problem of climate change, of poverty in the midst of the plenty, and this will increase through the pandemic we are just experiencing, and the lockdown and the economic disaster which it will bring for the world. But we also have on the subjective level, an increase in subjective loneliness, and that was certainly not helped by having social isolation and lockdowns through the pandemics, but also increasing stress-related diseases, depression, and all kind of mental health diseases. So we wanted to see whether through meditation-based mental training, which is also influenced from contemplative practice from the East, but also Western psychological practice, whether you could increase well-being, foster shared humanity, social connectedness and social skills, prosocial motivation and cooperation, reduce stress, and improve global compassion, but also self-compassion. So this, probably a lot of people know this project by now because it has been around since a while. We had 300 people with 4 different cohorts, and they basically did a 3 months kind of presence module, which is focusing on mindfulness, attention-based practices. So bringing the mind back into the present moment. And then in red, we had these compassion-based, affect and care-based modules. So it's a lot about how to accept emotions, social emotions, gratitude, loving kindness, compassion. It's very emotional. Then this is a more cognitive module where you was trained in developing a meta-cognitive bird's eye perspective on your mind and on self and others. And so the people did 9 months of training, but the 2 cohorts in 3 different sequences. So one cohort started with presence, then compassion-based, perspective-based, the other cohort the other way around. And so we could test the effect, the specific effect of specific practices on all kind of different measures. And we had a wonderful team of 17 teachers, and we had an app which helped you every day to practice 30 minutes at home with the teachers through video calls, or we did also dyadic partner exercise. And this is how it looked like when 80 people at the beginning of a 3 months module were in a retreat, sitting together in silence and introduced into the practice of a module. And so these practices you see here, like breathing meditation and body scan, were the practices they should do at home, 30 minutes every day, 20 minutes body scan, 10 minutes breathing. And then for the what we call social module, the compassion-based affect and perspective module, you had classic meditation like loving kindness or observing thoughts, but you also had where you see these diets, the 2 people, and the 2 people means that you did a 10-minute exercise every day with a partner, which changed every week, so that you could really train social connectedness, intersubjective skill, empathy, and then perspective taking and theory of mind in the other. So that was the app, and that was allowing you also in holiday to continue practicing. This is how diets look like if you really do them in the 2 hours weekly course, because I had a 2 hours weekly course. You could really do the diet together, but at home you were having this window and you were coupled with a partner through the app. And so because this dyadic let's say, the dyadic meditation was new at that time, we wanted to know, does it really foster social connectedness? Because one of the biggest problems we have in our, civilized Western world is an increasing level of subjective loneliness, of people feeling disconnected from themselves and others. And it's not just the 80 plus, the older one, but it is increasingly the younger generation, the 19 to 25 years old, who feel the loneliest on this planet. And loneliness has detrimental effect on all kinds of things. So could this diet help to reconnect people with each other? And in fact, people said yes. After doing these 10 minutes diet, they felt closer to the other partner they did it. But most interestingly, each week they felt already closer, even if they were coupled with a new partner, with someone they didn't know. And they also told more and more personal things. So these kind of new intersubjective meditation really fosters what we call shared humanity and social connectedness, and the feeling of we are all human beings interdependently woven into each other. So there is almost 42 different papers out already. You can email me, I can send you the kind of scientific paper. I give you a little glimpse today of different domains where we find wonderful results, but of course there is much more to say about the resource project. The people really loved this project. They had very high, they really practiced a lot every day, and we had less than 8% dropout. So they all kept going even after a year. And so now a lot of people have asked, why did you separate these 3 modules? No, and for example, MBSR 8-week project, the MBSR program, there is a mixture of different meditation, but we wanted to really separate them because we also knew from neuroscience and psychology that the social brain, understanding other people, rely on different networks. And there is a red socio-emotional brain networks which subserves social emotions like empathy and compassion. And then there is another network in the brain, the green one I will show you in colors. Is not green in reality, but for the purpose of this presentation, which is called mentalizing or theory of mind network, and is more like a cognitive reflective network. So let me talk about shortly, because we talk about the power of compassion, and so we should better know what is really compassion, because compassion is actually not feeling with. This is empathy. If someone suffers and you suffer too, this is empathy. You feel with. But compassion is actually a care, is a concern, is feeling for someone else. And we needed to really do a lot of research to understand that these 2 concepts, empathy and compassion, couldn't be more different. And I cut a long story very short. The model is that when someone is suffering, for example, now in COVID time, and you have nurses and doctors, overwhelmed with the amount of patients coming in, like in New York or in Italian hospitals, and the suffering is coming into their, let's say, brain. This results in a healthy empathic response. People feel, oh, this person is suffering, I have to do something about it. You feel a little bit uncomfortable suffering too. But now, if you are confronted with too much trauma, or you have also experienced trauma yourself, this can go into empathic distress. And if you end up in empathic distress, it's all about you feeling threatened, you feeling fearful, stressed, and then the whole organism will want to protect itself. Perhaps you will even say, I don't want to see this suffering anymore from the others. And so what we teach in the affect module is how to recognize a healthy empathic response and move into compassion, because compassion is a very resilient and very powerful strategy, which is a coping strategy and a resilience strategy, which is rooted in care and love. So we started doing this research with Mathieu Ricard, a Buddhist monk who is also a honorary board member of the Mind and Life Europe Institute. I think everyone knows him. And we discovered that actually compassion networks, when he engaged in compassion meditation, were totally different than the empathy network. And I show you this here because that were findings we produced in not in monks, but in normal, students from Zurich, where we teach them in empathy and then we teach them in compassion. And you could see that after empathy training, you had these pain networks and these negative affect networks lighting up more. And then in the same people, after compassion training, when they were confronted with suffering, another network of affiliation care, which comes with an increase of warmth and positive emotion, lit up, which is depicted in red. So compassion and empathy rely on two different networks. And it is very important to recognize the empathic healthy response, avoid that you go in distress, and go into healthy compassion. So that is what we train a lot in the compassion affect module. But what do we do in this green perspective module? We train something which has been called theory of mind or cognitive perspective taking. And this is really important if you want to overcome conflict. Because you see this affiliative care system, which relies, which is the basis of care and compassion, is evolutionary, biological made so that you care about your children and about your in-group and the people you like. But what about nations you don't know, or people with religious backgrounds you don't know, you don't understand, or people with different cultural backgrounds? You really need to a cognitive perspective and put yourself into the shoes of the other and understand that this other person has different beliefs, and that beliefs are just a construction, and that also your beliefs are a construction. Now, if you can add this wisdom component, then you have care as a motivator for compassion and wisdom together, the two wings of compassion, and you can move into global compassion. And we can even measure these networks in the brain. You see on the left is this kind of cognitive, meta-cognitive reflective network. And on the right side is the emotional limbic networks with empathy and compassion. And they actually don't hang together. You can be very good in cognitive perspective taking, like psychopaths are, and very poor in empathy. And you can be very empathic, but not so good in social intelligence. So, okay, can we train these different networks with these modules we have devised, with these meditation-based different practices? And the answer is yes, we can. If you do 3 months of attention-based mindfulness training, attention goes up. You see it here. Attention goes up after 3 months. And also, if you do compassion-based 3 months training, you also have a huge increase in attention. Wonderful. Now, what about compassion? Is it enough to practice attention-based mindfulness practice like body scan, breathing, meditation to increase compassion? And the answer is no. You see no yellow here. You really need to engage in explicit compassion, heart opening exercises and practices to increase compassion. So through the affect module. And what about this social intelligence score, this ability to put yourself in the mental shoes of someone else? Here the answer is very clear. I cut it short. You have to go through a perspective module where every day you practice this perspective-taking ability with another partner, putting yourself, into the shoes of the other and what is the other believing, to actually really increase the score. Neither the compassion module, where you also do diets every day, or the mindfulness attention module does the job. So it is very specific. It matters what you practice. And this also shows up in the brain. If you look at the cortical changes in the brain, the neuroplasticity, you see the 3 colors of this brain here. So after 3 months of attention-based mindfulness, you get thicker prefrontal cortex. After 3 months of compassion-based training, you get thicker areas here, insula. These are networks I showed you before already, very important for emotion regulation, empathy, compassion. And after, again, 3 months of perspective taking and increases in theory of mind and social intelligence, you get thicker areas. Here's the TPJ, which are very important for these reflective theory of mind, cognitive perspective taking ability. So you see the specificity also in your brain. The good news is we can change our brains, even, you know, the people who are 20 to 45, 55 years old, on average 43. So they are not the young the young students, they are old like me, and we still can learn this kind of high level wholesome qualities, and the brain will change in its hardware. So that was really revolutionary. And now the question was, can we also reduce social stress? And not just on the level, like a lot of studies have asked, you know, questionnaires. Can we reduce stress subjectively, that you feel less stressed? But we were interested, can you reduce it on the level of cortisol, of the stress hormone in our body? And so we did a lot of experiments where we stressed out people in the lab. They had to give a talk in front of a not very nice audience. And then we measured their cortisol level, the cortisol stress response to this social stressor. And this kind of doctor-like people, they were trained not to give any social nice cues, but to be like judgmental. And so people hate that. They feel not worth, not good enough, and that brings social stress up. And what we found was interesting, because this very purely attention-based module, the 3 months presence module, were extremely, you know, as I showed you, good for attention, but it did not reduce social stress at all on the hormonal level. We needed these social intersubjective mental practice units where people do these 10 minutes diets every day to reduce social stress up to 51%. So this is really the power of compassion and intersubjective practice, the we mode. I just, for sake of time, go over that. So I think, you know, mindfulness, the mindfulness movement should never forget that Buddhist practice emerged out of the wish for improving compassion and reducing suffering, and not to become a more focused and more attentive mind. That was the precondition, the baseline. And so I show you a lot of data where compassion and intersubjective practice, the we, you know, me and the other, are actually really powerful driver of change. And that is the last data that would also show the power of compassion, because we measured behavior, cooperative behavior, trust behavior, prosocial behavior. And we used real money. So we used paradigms which are also used by economists to measure how cooperative a society is, or how trustful someone is. And so people really had to donate money or exchange money. And what we found is that actually compassion-based affect module, these explicit compassion and gratitude practices, loving kindness practice, accepting difficult emotion practice, were the strongest in increasing these altruistic, caring, prosocial motivation and helping, much more than the other modules, which were actually not significant. So I hope that I could really show you the power of compassion, and also that it really matters what you practice. The field of contemplative science really needs to start differentiating about all these different levels of practices contemplative tradition have brought about, and really, because we also did qualitative research, qualitative interviews, and the people also experience these practices totally different. They feel like it's totally different practices. And as I could show you, some practices, especially these mindfulness attention-based practices, are very good to increase attention and to stabilize the mind and to bring you calmness. But they are not so efficient when it comes to pure altruism, global cooperation, global compassion. And other practices are very, very good to increase social intelligence and the ability to take the perspective of someone else. And the practices of the heart are not so useful. And I showed you that you can really change the heart wired the gray matter of your brain. So it's like the hard disk of our brain. And that also there, depending on what you practice, you will find different changes in different networks. And I showed you that you can reduce your stress, but if you really want to reduce onto the body hormonal level, again, these intersubjective social practices are most powerful to reduce social stress. And then I didn't show you, but all these practices are very, very beneficial for interoceptive body awareness, to become aware of what's going on in your body. And this helps empathy and emotion understanding. And but that takes time. So we showed again and again, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and only then the effects become visible. So just a little weekend seminar is a nice start, but it will not affect these important changes in your body, which are crucial for mental health and physical health and also decision making. Yes, so what we do is, of course, to change a society and to make it more compassionate, you can also change the law, the institutional design. But I have shown that new work can also, needs inner work, and that we can actually change our brains, our behavior, our immune system, autonomic system, and our well-being through these kind of practices. And we should start to practice them already in school, because the brains of children are super, super plastic. And so we want to bring these programs in shorter version, because 9 months is of course very long and very intensive for many institutions like schools or healthcare institution. So we're doing this shorter masterclass of 3 days with 8 weeks retreats, like here for doctors and nurses, to help them build their resilience and to cope with this huge amount of stress they are exposed every day, but also for leaders, for business leaders, because leadership is a very difficult thing too, but also for kids and school teachers. So that is the group I'm grateful for. We had a huge group supporting this monster big study over many years, and a lot of wonderful teachers. And thank you for your attention. I'm really looking forward to discussing more, about everything.
Tania, thank you so much. Super interesting presentation, and you know, as usual, you're able to pack a tremendous amount into precisely 30 minutes. So congratulations for that too. I want to invite the participants to share questions, either on the chat room, or if you like, you can unmute yourself in a minute, but you can also start your video, and I will try, if I hope to see you and call on you, and you could ask your question to succinctly, please, to Tania in person. And as you're thinking of your questions, Tania, I had three of them. You answered my third one, which was, with this great project, where will the resource project actually engage in societal transformation? And you answered that wonderfully at the end. But two other short questions. 9 months training is, as you also indicated, is a lot for people. Compared often to the weekend things that you see, or offerings that are even shorter. Over those 9 months, how much time would people spend either per day or per week, just to get a sense of the scope? So one question. And the second question is, could you give two maybe short examples of how you train for compassion versus empathy? Just, you know, like maybe an exercise, so that we can maybe better understand this really important differentiation. And that will give them time then for other questions to gather. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, perhaps one thing which I might share, because at the beginning of the study, people said, you will have a dropout rate of 100%, because it's crazy what you asked people to do 9 months. There was only 8 weeks around. But actually the people were, less than 8% dropout. And some people continued doing the practice and the diet practice 3 years after we stopped on a self-organized level. And when I heard the feedback at the end of the 9 months, when we said goodbye to them, every one of them was saying it's just the beginning. So in a way, it was this paradoxical thing that it was 9 months and intense, but everyone who went through it felt it actually as being short and just the beginning, and that the whole life would now be about transformation and would never stop, no? And so I think actually 9 months sounds a lot, but then when you do it, it's actually very short, and people realize inner transformation is a lifelong task, you know, is a lifelong journey. So yeah, so that is then what they did is they trained about so we asked them to do, because once a week they came together anyhow. On Sunday was free because we didn't want it to overstretch, so we asked them to do 5 at home, no, 30 minutes meditation, 5 days, 30 minutes meditation for 5 days. And as you can see, most of them did actually 5. So the compliance was huge. That was very high. Some did more, some a little bit less, but we were, you know, we were at this speed, you know, so people meditated every day almost, and sometimes even several times a day. And the diets was also astonishing because you have to organize, no? You have to find another, you have to meet this person, the person could not be there. And the diets were done as much as the meditation alone. That means people really loved them because somehow it reconnects with other people, and it also helps you to find the discipline because you have this rendezvous with someone. So you look forward to it and you don't want the other let down. So the people really do the diets, and that was astonishing because it was a risky thing to dare. Yeah. And the second question was, oh, empathy, compassion. It's not so, I can't do it so quickly because it's a whole sequence of at least 40 minutes, because first we teach people to get in connection with their suffering and with the empathy, with, you know, because a lot of people actually don't want to have empathy also because it would connect them with their own suffering. So it's also to learn to, you know, to be with your suffering and with the negative emotions without dumping them or reducing them. And then when you have learned that, we move into self-compassion and then into loving kindness and then into real compassion. And so you can feel how to move through these different states through different visualization practices. And then, you know, you feel, oh, it's so different to be in an empathic resonance and then to be in a compassionate one. Yeah.
Good, thank you. There is a question from Ludmila. Am I getting that right? I don't know if she wants to activate herself, but in the meantime, I have 2 screens here, so I just have to flip back and forth. In the meantime,
questions rising below, but you can read them better, I guess.
I'll read the question to you, Tania. This is, do you have any data on whether it was more difficult for your participants to start with a particular type of contemplative training, for example, compassion training, more difficult than presence?
So in a way, we would have thought that, you know, that the people would do much better if they had the presence training and then the compassion training, because, you know, like in the big cohorts, everyone went through this attention-based mindfulness training first and then in compassion. But we had this one group which immediately jumped into compassion, into, you know, 13 weeks of compassion. And they were actually fine. They were doing really well. Of course, we had to a little bit, you know, like introduce breathing meditation first, but they were actually also doing well, and we were astonished. But I would say, in general, people tell us that it is good to first learn to sit and first, you know, stabilize the mind and first, you know, have a basic mindfulness practice. And for example, when I teach masterclass on the more elevated level, it is very beneficial if people have done an MBSR course of 8 weeks or some, you know, basic mindfulness practice, because that's really the foundation for everything else then. Mm-hmm. You know, if your mind is too scattered, you cannot really concentrate on loving kindness practice. You have to imagine someone in your mind for 30, 40 minutes, and then, oh, it's always gone, no? So it's really important first to also learn just to be there with yourself and to move into.
We have another question from Veronica Bauer. Veronica, would you like to state your question or read your question if you unmute yourself? Otherwise, I can do it for you. But please.
I can try. Let me see.
Hello. I see
Oh,
you.
I don't see my question. Hello. My question is, do you have any sense on the lasting effects if people stop the practices, or any other influences on effectiveness of methods, type of how long, what practices, refreshers, or any other contributing factors to success?
Yeah, so we basically measured 4 months and 10 months after they stopped, but we have not looked at the data yet because we are still working on the main data. So I can't tell you in terms of scientific, but in terms of the brain research and the plasticity research, which is around and which we know, of course, it's like it's in the gym, the muscle training. If you don't practice, it goes back, no? Plasticity goes back again. Also, brain plasticity is not like you change your brain and then it stays forever. So in a way, I guess it's the same thing then for muscles and sport. You have to continuously practice, and so that the plasticity you gained will last. You know, but of course, the more you become expert, as you know probably, the more you can practice little bit, because you are practicing in your everyday life without formal practice. You are doing it in the tube, you are doing it in the airplane. So in a way, your practice becomes a habit and becomes a way of life. And so in a way, less and less is needed because you already treat yourself in a different way to start with. So in a way, once you become expert, I think less practice is needed to stay on the same level, because your whole, like at some point, compassion becomes a life attitude and not just a skill. And the way you receive life and you interpret life is different than at the beginning of your journey. Yeah, and then efficientness. I have started to show you. We have the resource project really shows what we call differential effects. So it's really showing, that certain practices are beneficial for certain things, but not for others. So I guess really it depends on what do you want to foster. Do you want to focus on compassion and altruism? Then you should really do explicit hard practices. If you only want to stabilize the mind because there is, attention deficit problem, actually every meditation practice is helping to focus attention if you do it right. But if you want to, train this meta-cognitive and the wisdom, you need other practices. These explicit hard practice actually don't do so much, So I guess, and we have 42 papers which almost always show these differential effects, and so it really depends, with whom are you practicing? What is the weakness of this person? What does this person needs to develop most? And then you can choose the practices where these are the most efficient, for example, to open the heart and develop the frequency of the heart and gratitude. If, for example, some people are very good in equanimity, they are like super, but then they have not really practiced the heart, compassion practice. And so then, you would say, okay, let's do an affect module with them because they need to build up more of this quality.
Good. There are two questions that are...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. There are two questions that are a little bit similar, so I'd like to take them just one after the other, and then, Tania, you can answer them. One is from Angela in regard to education, and the other one is from Leah. And if either of you, Angela, Leah, would like to share your question, that would be great. We'll just hear the questions and then Tania can answer.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very, very interesting. I tried to, I know this, it is research for the book Power and Care. And I ask if you, I am a teacher in Montpellier University in France. And I ask you if you introduce this study in the field of education, because I too, I wanted to present this. This is a very, very beautiful study on neuroplasticity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's go just directly also to Leah's question, because I think it's directly connected.
Yeah, it's basically the same question. I think in the end you mentioned that this could be a very useful approach in schools, and I was wondering whether you are already collaborating with any schools or teachers.
Yeah, so absolutely, no, that's a plan I have since long time, but then, you know, now at the moment I'm with both hands involved in a COVID-related, you know, pandemic grant where we give an app to people to basically identify vulnerable population and then do diets with them to see whether they can self-help, you know, like they can get out of vulnerability and stress through these dietic practice in Berlin. And so my project I wanted to start has now been removed to the future. It was in children, no? So the goal was to try just the diets, because I think there are more and more programs on mindfulness, no? The Frog program and Bamboo program and a lot of programs now on basic mindfulness entering schools. But what is missing is these intersubjective, like, you know, like how to actually learn empathy, theory of mind, social skills, and the we-ness, the cooperativity. And so the next project we can start, but I hope after COVID, because at the moment it would be also difficult, is to actually do the diets with children in schools and to see whether we can reduce bullying and foster the solidarity in classrooms. But we also want to do it with teachers, because teachers also need a lot of self-compassion and resilience training, no? So the teachers would rather get masterclass, you know, on burnout prevention, on empathy, distress, and compassion. And the children would rather playfully work with the diets, because this is more about connecting with each other. And what we would also hope is that, you know, at a certain age, there is a lot of bullying and in-group, out-group, and, you know, some children are put out of the system. It can be very brutal. And so we would hope that these diets, because you pair children over weeks with different children, you know, would reduce these kind of, you know, these exclusion of certain children, the bullying. But let's see when we can really start. You know, science always takes longer than you think. And, you know, with the pandemic, we couldn't go into schools. So they need to open first. Yeah.
Great. I think, Tania, with that, you also, to a considerable extent, I hope, let me know if not, answered a question from Verena about how to bring this out to the people, which you also mentioned at the conclusion of your study. And maybe just in regard to the prior two questions, a short reference to the work that Mind and Life Europe is doing in education. We have an initiative that we call the Community for Contemplative Education, CCE. And if you go on our website, on the MLE website, you will see this as one of our initiatives. It's an extensive website that we've built up with about 50 active people in the area of education at all different levels. And it's a growing kind of bottom-up network that platform that we're hosting, and also including a number of research areas. And for those particularly interested or active in education, certainly it would be a resource, I think, and of interest for you to explore. So, Verena, if that didn't answer your question, then, you know, just drop me a line in the chat. And otherwise, I'd like to pop over to Wolfgang, who has a question. Wolfgang, would you like to share your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tania, for your presentation. It was wonderful. I would like to ask you, as the compassion training that you're presenting and using in the study seems to be very effective. I was wondering how to, when you compare it with other compassion trainings, like the compassion cultivation training or sustainable compassion, I think, yeah, sustainable compassion training or mindful self-compassion. Do you see similarities or differences, or what similarities or differences do you find?
Yeah, so so I would say the affect module has a lot of similarity. It's, let's say, there are a lot of elements you can see in other compassion-based programs, like for example, when we do the daily meta meditation, loving kindness meditation, we always start with self-compassion. So you could just say Christine Nielsen-Germer's self-compassion training is 8 weeks more or less only on self-compassion, and we in the affect module have a huge amount of this, you know, empathy versus compassion, which do not, I don't think these aspects exist so much in, you know, in 8 weeks self-compassion or in CC care. And we also have these diets, and the diets have a certain, they have a specific dynamic and also a specific let's say these kind of social connectedness and getting you out of loneliness, I think is very specific. And these type of diets you do as a formal practice every day through the app. I don't think they exist in all the other programs. And then another feature, let's say from resource program, which so far did not exist, but I don't know, you never know what's popping up and I don't know about, but the perspective module is I have not talked about it, but the perspective diet is based on internal family system therapy approaches, which comes from the clinic and from the Western approach. So it has not, you don't find that in Buddhist secular training studies because it's inner part work, and you first have to work on the inner parts, identify them, and then these diets are based on how to work with these inner parts. So you could say without that being therapy, because we don't do the therapy part of it, it has a very strong aspect about who am I, the self. And the motivation to do that was to actually approach emptiness, you know, the Buddhist meditation of emptiness, but without, you know, going to a Westerner and say, hey, you're actually not existing, you know, there is no self, you are not there, because that basically freaks out people. So so we started to look into into the Westerner clinical approaches, where you have always this notion of the self being divided in very different inner parts and different personality aspects. And then once you have understood that, you know, you have the inner manager and the hurt child and the loving mother and all these different aspects, which then when you're very identified with an aspect can color your day, it can color your interaction with others. And then you learn to drop these aspects. And when you learn to drop these aspects, you can, without teaching emptiness explicitly, you can drop into this space and realize, oh, there is an observer. Who is the observer watching? If it's not a part of me, there is still someone, no? So there is this container of all these inner aspects, which is not the inner, is not an inner part. And that is a big, what people call the big compassionate self, or and that's an experience which is a very strong experience, but we basically approach this experience through a very playful mean of first understanding who am I, you know, from what, and I think these aspects are very much in the perspective module resource project, and I wouldn't know about any other of these 8 weeks programs doing that. Of course, when you look in therapy and real therapy one-to-one, you have, of course, active work with inner parts, but then it is different because you look at these, it's trauma therapy, it's therapy, it's not, we don't do that, no. And then, of course, the similarity, the presence module, you find it basically everywhere. In each of the, I mean, this is basic mindfulness, sensory-based presence practices, as listening, sounds, taste, body scan, breathing meditation, open presence. So the presence module is very, very similar to MBSR. It's just in that sort purified because it was a scientific study. We didn't want it to have a mixed bag of beans of all kind of practices, because we wanted to learn which practice type is doing what. And so we had to separate them. I hope it answers a little bit your question.
Thank you, Tania. I think it also answered another small hidden question in there that I overlooked, which was whether you would be willing to comment on the format of the MBSR program. But I think you also, in a sense, applied that also in contrast to the training of the resource project.
yeah, or perhaps just because I think you know, when the paper came out and showed that the presence module was not reducing stress and not doing compassion, so the people were saying, does that mean that MBSR doesn't work? And so I was always saying, no, because MBSR was made for a practical reason. It was made to reduce stress in the clinical concept. So the mixture of MBSR in these 8 weeks is a mix, you know, there is a little bit of self-compassion implicitly taught, you know, if you know John Kabat-Zinn, when he, even if he teaches, you know, like breathing meditation, he doesn't really teach a shamatha practice, like, you know, like in terms of focusing on an object and, you know, really attention-based shamatha practice. But he says, and if your mind wanders away, don't beat you up. Be kind to yourself and just kindly and lovingly come back to your breath and start from beginning, already the voice. So we would call that implicit self-compassion training. It's not just, you know, attention-based shamatha practice. There is implicitly involved in the whole self-compassion element of it. So, and depending on how the teacher is teaching an MBSR course, you will also have a little bit of meta practice on day 4. You will have a little bit of observing thoughts. So it's a big mix, no? And then you have yoga, which is a body practice. So you can't really compare an 8-week mindfulness MBSR with the presence module.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's very helpful to also to have that clarification. Tania, you spoke about COVID and that you, like many other people, like most people, are engaged with that also professionally with your study, and you mentioned also a number of other different groups, and you've been working on this for quite a long time, and it's a really, as you said, I think you said a monster study. That being the case, where would you like to see it, or where would you expect to see it and its implications in 3 years?
In 3 years or 4, I mean, you know, as I said, we are starting doing these master classes as much as we can, so that we can really bring it now into the field and into the specific context of the systems which need that most. Now, at the beginning, it was a scientific study. Now we have almost 42 or 44 papers out. And I really want to see these practices, but adapted to the field. So for example, these practices needs to be adapted for the field of healthcare workers. Mm-hmm. And so I would love that, you know, all the hospitals and also medical students would learn that throughout their studies already, to be better equipped for the work they have to do. Now, I would like to see these practices like the diets, for example, at the platform in kids and in schools. You know, 10 minutes every day in school. And I mean, 10 minutes is nothing. But when you look at the benefits of these practices on social skills, on cooperation, on connectedness, on wisdom, it's huge. And, you know, instead of basically 10 minutes reading something you can also read in your cell phone, no? A memo, I mean, you could really embed these 10 minutes, and it would be playful, and probably the kids would also start doing it with other schools and connect to other kids and, you know, globally. And so you could create these kind of deep connectivity networks, which are not as narcissistic, like, you know, Facebook, like, yeah, great, it's very narcissistic. It's not a real deep soul meeting between vulnerable two people, no? And the diet is a very beautiful, vulnerable thing, but you need to create safe spaces. So you cannot just have an app and start. You have to learn first, what does it mean, a contemplative diet? There are a lot of do's and don'ts, no? So I would wish that this safe space of an internet platform could be created, so that people, for example, young people, could meet old people for 10 minutes of a very deep, meaningful dialogue. And that would bring the young and the old people out of their subjective loneliness trap. You know, so I would like to see that. And I also would like to see that in not only education and in healthcare, but also in businesses, leadership, because the leaders are the very lonely too. You know, on the top now is typical example of lonely people. And so if they could connect like that, and then also, you know, have more compassionate leadership, that would be wonderful too. So I see a lot of potential, and then of course you have to build up the formats, and we started to adapt it to the specific needs of people.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Not just bring a 9 months program into that. No,
I understand. I mean, two things. First of all, what you said there is a good segue into another question, which is close to my heart. And maybe just a comment for those who haven't been able to be on the whole time. We are recording this, and so that should be available for review. Again, because there was so much content packed into the 30 minutes that Tania presented. But Tania, there's a really interesting question from Angela. And Angela, would you like to present the question, or if you unmute and show us, read it?
Yes, I would like to ask you, in your presentation, you talked about economics, and can you tell us more about this relation that you have with the economic field and the manager and the care and compassion in this field?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's another bridge. No, I have been building a lot of bridges in my life, and when I was moving to Zurich, I moved into the economic department because we were doing research on the condition for cooperation to work and when it collapses. And so I was working with economic people. And then I realized that in the neoclassicistic economic models, in the mathematical model, the utility function, never the concepts were mentioned which were so dear to my heart: compassion, empathy, perspective taking, nothing. And so I was like, how can economic model explain human cooperation and decision making without taking into account the social nature of humans? And so we started working on how psychological knowledge about motivation, about social brain, about empathy and compassion can actually inform new economic models, which take into consideration that humans are not only motivated to, to have more achievement or to consumption, basically to optimize their utility in terms of gaining more money or having more consumption goods, but that we equally, also evolutionary speaking, care about affiliation, about belonging to a group, about helping another person.
Whoops. And the mute button is a good button to push at this time, I think. Go ahead.
There was a vacuum cleaner in the background. and so we try to show that actually these motivations, which are very old, evolutionary motivation like affiliation and care, which drive our actions and our concerns and our happiness, need to be entering neoclassicistic and economic utility functions, and that is really a necessity to produce economic systems which are more caring. And this is why we call it the caring economics approach. It's bringing back a balance, because most of our systems we have built in the West, at least, whether it's education, healthcare or so, are focused mostly on motives we call achievement, power, and consumption. And these motivations, they are all linked to, first, they are very quickly addictive. You can workaholism, you can want to have more and more money, more and more consumption good, and so on. And they are also linked to threat, to a stress system, because, for example, with achievement, if you always want to be the best, you're teaching the children already, they always need to be the best. They need to be, but normal distribution, you cannot be always the best. It cannot work in the world. Imagine a world with only the best. I mean, it doesn't work. We have a normal distribution around everything. There are good days, there are bad days. But the narrative in which we living in science, in politics, in all the big systems, is always achievement, power, and consumption. And there is no value anymore on other motives like care and affiliation, even though they are crucial for survival and they need to be in balance with the other motives so that we have healthy systems. individual system and macro economic system. So that's how, and you know, of course, the resource project, you could say, ties in, because the data I showed you with, you know, with these with these economic games we use to measure cooperation and altruism, the old classic model of economy say, either you are good or you are an egoist, but this stays in the, you know, it's not dependent on the context. You cannot train, you cannot change it. You're born with it, and that's it. Endogenously given, they call it. It's there. You know, you have a preference fixed. And what we show is no, 30 minutes of mental training can change the preference, what, you know, economists call preference. We call it. That was funny. Carolina was jogging.
Tania, this is a big theme and a really important theme. I think also responsible for a lot of misery in the world in terms of non-prosocial behavior in the economic area. But it's 1932 now, and although we started a minute too late, if we finish now, or 33, then we will have kept to our word, so to speak. So Carolina's having a good time, as we have had as well. So on behalf of Mind and Life Europe, Tania, thank you so much for sharing this super fabulous project. And thank all of you for being with us for this hour. And we hope to see you again. We won't even pause for the summer. On August 1st, we have the next webinar with Roshi Joan Halifax. So Tania, again, a warm thanks for sharing with us. And I wish all of you a wonderful evening. Thanks for being with us.
Wonderful evening to everyone.